Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of History and a Drink. I'm Shawn.
And I'm Frank, and tonight we're going to be learning about Teddy Roosevelt, one of our favorite presidents. But we're not going to look at his presidency. We're not going to look at him as a parent. We're going to look at his adventures he went on.
Absolutely.
So tonight's drink is in honor of one of his adventures in the Spanish-American War. So he is going to be the second in command when the formation of the 1st Volunteer Cavalry Regiment is created. And they trained in San Antonio, Texas, and then they fought in Cuba. So we decided to find something that kind of marries the two, a whiskey and a rum together. And what we have is a version of the Rough Rider, which we're calling the 1st Cavalry Regiment.
Exactly.
So this is a drink that marries those two ideas together.
And for those of us here at the Bayhat, we can actually get that tonight. It is a good drink. It's a rum, it's a whiskey mixed together. It's got a little bit of mint, a little bit of sweet. For those of you guys at home, we'll put the recipe later and you can make it up yourselves. Yeah. So it's the 1st Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, though.
All right. So tonight we look at Teddy Roosevelt, and he really went on 4 very unique adventures in his lifetime, right? He's going to go out to the Wild West. He is going to participate in the Spanish-American War. He's going to go on an expedition across Africa, and then he's going to go and discover and travel a river in South America that's never been traveled before.
And this is besides him being the 26th president of the United States.
Right, exactly. Okay. So his first adventure is going to the West. And the reasons for doing this was really sad. So he married his first wife. He married the love of his life. Okay. All right. And her name was Alice Hathaway Lee.
Okay.
And they had a child together, and the child was born on February 12th of 1884. But what they didn't know is she had complications from the pregnancy that caused her kidneys to fail. And so 2 days later, Valentine's Day, she died.
She died in childbirth.
Well, the child's born 2 days.
And then 2 days afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
Then he gets another telegraph saying that his mother is very ill with typhoid fever, and she dies the same day. So his mother and his wife both die on the same day.
Two women influential in his life die on the same day.
Yep.
This is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt. Yep.
And so
before he was the president, what year is this?
This is 1884.
1884. Because he was president in the 1900s.
Correct.
So before he was the president, before he was the Teddy we know.
And this is him right at the beginning of his political career and stuff like that. And what he does is he's so distraught, he's got to go and find himself. So he hands off his daughter, Alice,
brand new born 2-day-old daughter,
to his sister.
Okay.
And goes out west to North Dakota.
Now, he's a New York guy, so he's a big city, New York business guy.
Yeah.
And so he's going out to North Dakota.
And so he's going to decide that he wants to be a cowboy like them out there, and really kind of live at the end of the cowboy era. And so he goes out there, and he's eventually going to build a ranch that he calls Elkhorn.
Okay.
He's going to have his own brand of cattle, and his brand is going to be the Maltese Cross.
Okay.
And
Maltese Cross. That's like I've seen that before, where it's like arrows.
4 arrows pointing in.
Gotcha.
Right. Think of the Templars.
Gotcha. 19 Templars.
Right.
Okay.
While he's out there, he actually writes 3 books about what he's done, and he's got hunting trips of a ranchman, ranch life, and the hunting trail, and the wilderness hunter. You can kind of see a theme in here.
Exactly. Hunting and ranch life and that. Now, being from New York, though, was he really accepted out there?
No. Think about a New Yorker. It's like that commercial of the
New York City.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And he just didn't fit in because he brought his clothes from Brooks Brothers, and they were all custom fitted to him.
Right.
Cowboys don't wear custom fitted clothes. And he tried to participate and do the same things with them, but they just never completely accepted him.
Okay.
Now, one of his other big pushes there was working with other ranchers to really conserve the land that was out there. And
we saw that later in his life too, conservation of land. And he was big into the environment.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting thing because for as much as we're going to see him killing animals and stuff, he's a huge conservationist as well. Okay. And so that weird dichotomy that he has.
Sure.
But he's going to start a group known as the Boone and Crockett Club, which is
Daniel Boone, David Crockett.
Yep. And they're going to do the conservation out there. Now, in 1886, the winter of 1886 to 1887 was a devastating winter, and his whole herd of cows died, as did many other ranchers' cows.
So it's not a good year to be a rancher.
No. And so at that point, he turns in his saddle and his spurs and goes back east.
Okay.
And at this point, his daughter's 3 years old and never seen him.
Gotcha. He's been out there for 3 years now.
3 years.
Done it, tried doing it back to New York.
Yep. And so he comes back and he's going to get remarried to another woman and have, 5 more kids with that. So I think he has a total of 6 kids.
Okay.
Alice from the first wife and the other one's from the second wife.
Gotcha.
Now, he's going to work his way up through different government jobs, and eventually he's going to become, roughly 10 years after this, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Okay. Now, he's not in the Navy.
No.
He's not in the military. He's not in that. He's a civilian part of it.
Correct.
Okay.
And the actual Secretary of the Navy, John Long, at the time, had lots of illnesses and seemed to never be in the office. So Teddy Roosevelt was kind of unsupervised and allowed to do some things that he probably shouldn't have done.
Gotcha.
And takes a lot of liberties with his position.
Sure.
All right. So we see in 1898 the move towards the Spanish-American War. Now, the Spanish had controlled Cuba and the Philippines.
Yep.
And Cuba, we had been trying to help them liberate themselves for the better part of 30 years.
Cuba's right on our back door. We want to control them anyway, so and to bring them on, and also to so it's good idea.
So what happens is we send a battleship or a dreadnought at the time, the USS Maine, to Havana Harbor. And while in Havana Harbor, she explodes and sinks.
And hence the term, remember the Maine.
Right, and that becomes the rallying cry for the war. Now, we send divers. What they discover is the blast. When they look at the metal, the metal goes out, meaning the explosion happened from the inside out. And the reports said that, but the public didn't want to see it. Fake news.
So it may have been fake news. Okay, gotcha.
All right. Then we see that the Spanish ambassador writes this letter back to the leadership in Spain that was really derogatory about the Americans and what lowlifes we were and stuff like that.
So what would have been a tweet in 1900 was
in 2000, yes.
2000, exactly. Yep.
And it gets leaked to the press, and William Randolph Hearst publishes it in all his papers, right? Well, that pisses off the Spanish to the point where they're so mad at us, they declare war on us.
Gotcha.
We don't declare war on them. So we are the victims here.
But we're mad as well, so we're gonna fight them as well. So,
because William McKinley, the president at the time, never wanted to fight this war, but he gets pushed into it through the media and through the public.
Okay.
So Roosevelt is then going to resign his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and with a guy named Leonard Wood, they're going to start the first volunteer cavalry regiment.
Okay.
Right?
And who are they going to put in charge of it?
Well, Leonard Wood will be the colonel.
Sure.
And then Teddy is second in charge.
Okay.
And I think initially he's a lieutenant colonel. So
kind of sounds like a militia, like they're volunteers, militia. All right.
Well, if you really go and read about the people that volunteered for this, they were people from the Ivy League. They were boxers. They were gangsters. They were cowboys. They came from every part of society.
From Tennessee, the volunteer state.
Well, maybe some from there too.
Exactly.
But they went through all their applications and they put together this really diverse regiment. And they had them all come to San Antonio, Texas, where they then drilled them and really created the regiment. Okay. Now, they were supposed to be a cavalry regiment, meaning they were on horses.
Sure.
But when it came to actually going to Cuba, they didn't have enough transportation. So they had to leave 2/3 of the horses and 1/3 of the men behind and go over.
Gotcha. So they were on foot.
Yeah. So only the officers really used the horses.
Okay.
And so they're going to travel to Cuba in June of 1898. And they land at a place called Daiquiri.
Ah,
All right.
perfect. Exactly.
Now,
That's Larry Banks' favorite place.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the next day, they get into a skirmish that's part of the Battle of Los Guillermos.
Okay.
All right. At that point, there is something with the command up top, and Wood gets moved to be the commander of the whole battalion,
Okay.
and Teddy then gets command of the regiment.
Gotcha. Which
Right.
regiment is known as?
The 1st Volunteer.
Gotcha. But the
Cavalry.
nickname, they were the Rough Riders.
The Rough
right?
Riders,
The Rough
yeah.
Riders. Okay.
So on July 1st, he is going to participate with the Rough Riders in what's known as the Charge Up Kettle Hill.
Okay.
And this is part of the bigger battle of San Juan Heights. So there he is with his sword in his hand on the horse, leading his men up the hill into the machine guns of the Spanish. And he doesn't get hurt at all. And they are victorious, and that will then become this kind of mythical thing in the Spanish Spanish-American War.
Gotcha.
And there's paintings of it and all of that stuff.
He becomes a hero.
Yep. So the problem with it is the war in Cuba ended in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
But the troops stayed there, and most of the men who died from malaria or yellow fever and stuff like that. And actually, Teddy caught malaria while there.
Okay.
So he comes back, and that is his next adventure. Now, he gets nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor for leading that charge up into the machine gun nest.
But now he wasn't in the Army or Navy or any of the
Well,
things. He was a volunteer.
He was a volunteer, but that volunteer regiment got put into the Army.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the real generals, the ones who had made a career out of this, was like, this is BS. You get this guy who's got money, buys a regiment, and goes running up the hill, and we're going to give him a Congressional Medal of Honor.
They nix it.
No way.
Yep.
Now, in 2001, he gets the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously.
Okay.
All right. So he then goes back. He's running for Congress. He becomes the senator, or he actually then becomes governor of New York, and helps to McKinley a ton. And so in the 1900 election, he gets put as McKinley's vice president.
Gotcha.
Right. And ultimately he becomes president because McKinley's assassinated. But that we don't want to talk about that. We want to move to after he's president.
So he becomes president, he does his thing, becomes president, he's great, does his stuff. Now, after his presidency, what do we see?
All right. So he gets a opportunity from the Smithsonian Institute and the Museum of Natural History in New York.
Yeah.
To go on an expedition to Africa to collect specimens for both of those museums.
So he gets to go on safari, basically.
Right.
Okay.
And he goes on safari for about 14 months. All right.
That's a heck of a safari.
Yeah. So his son Kermit goes with him.
Kermit. Like Kermit the Frog?
Like Kermit the Frog.
Okay, Kermit the Frog.
All right. And while on this safari, they trap or kill 11,400 different animals.
So for 14 months, he's hunting, trapping, killing, but he's doing it for the museum.
Right. And so they brought with them naturalists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the one that I thought was the most interesting is they brought the taxidermist with them so he could start preparing the animals as soon as they were killed to be transported back to be taxidermied.
To museums in New York and Washington.
Right. So if you go to the Smithsonian today, or you go to the Natural History Museum in New York, most of the animals that you're going to see in the dioramas are animals that he actually shot and killed.
Interesting.
And
even
so,
back in the day.
Back in the day, they're over 100 and some years old now.
Okay.
Right. Now, of that, we're going to see 1,000 large animals, and 512 of them are considered big game.
Okay.
Right. And
what are big game animals?
Big game animals. That's what I asked too. And so what I found is it's like your lions, your jaguars, your cheetahs, leopards, hyenas,
buffalo,
elephants, water buffalo, rhinos, giraffe, hippos, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so he killed a menagerie of all of them.
Okay.
Right. Now he had two weapons that he used. He used a Springfield model 1903, which is a 3003.
Yep.
And then for the bigger animals, he used a 1895 Winchester, which was a .405 caliber.
An elephant gun, basically.
Right.
Yep, gotcha. Now, I think the coolest thing about that is one of the stuff that I've heard about and I've heard you talk about before is the Pigskin Library. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Pigskin Library. Tell us about that.
So the Pigskin Library is the books and stuff that he takes with him. So he has this aluminum chest that has roughly about 50, 60 books in there.
So this is modern day. You know, we've got our phones, we got our tablets, we can watch Netflix, we can do things. But back in that day, you've got books to read at night. So
Right.
that's it.
In between, he was writing tons of letters home.
Yep.
He was documenting everything he did, writing speeches, all
Sure.
of this stuff already. And so he is reading these. And what happens is the covers got used over time and fell off.
I mean, they're in camp, it's rain, it's everything else.
So what he did was they used the wild pigs, they caught them, killed them, tanned their hides, and used that to create the leather binding for the pigskin library.
Gotcha.
And you can actually go and see the Pigskin Library at the university or at Harvard University's library.
And I would assume too, not just him, but these were the people that were with him too. He's sharing books, saying who could read tonight, what are you reading, exactly, stories and everything with it.
Yeah, and it was a lot of like Milton, and he had Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. He had a lot of poetry. He had the Bible.
Well, the neat thing about it, and what I'm attracted to is, so if you were on a desert island and you had nothing else, you had no Wi-Fi, you had no anything, and all you had were books, what books would you take with you?
Right.
What was that?
So I was thinking about that, and so if I had three, right. One of my favorite books is Travels with Charlie by Steinbeck. I would have that one. One of my favorite authors is Clive Cussler, and I love his book Night Probe. And then I have to have a Tim Dorsey book. I need something to laugh with, and so Gators a Go-Go would be my third book.
Your books that you would have in that when you had nothing else.
Yeah. So we would love to hear what your books would be. So in the comments, go ahead and add what you would add to that.
You had no internet, you had no anything you could watch, you could only read. What books would you read over and over and over again in your life?
Yeah. So he was really criticized for the amount of killing he did with this.
Yeah.
And what he said is, if I am going to be condemned for this, then you need to also condemn the museums that hired me to go and collect these specimens. And the reality of it is, many of these things back then would have never been seen by people except in the museums that he made that. All right. So he did that for 14 months. And
so that was his third adventure.
And
that one was after he became president. So
correct.
what's his fourth we're going to talk about?
Now his fourth one, he gets talked into doing another expedition to go collect specimens again, this time just for the American History or Natural History Museum in New York.
Okay.
In South America.
Okay, so not Africa, now we're going to South America.
Yeah. So he's going to go there, get the specimens like he did. Now, when he gets there, he gets kind of talked into doing a quest.
Okay.
All right. A Portuguese explorer named Rodin, he wants to go up into the headwaters of the Amazon River and find the headwaters to a river that was called the River of Doubt. And no one had ever traveled the whole length of that. So Teddy, being a man's man,
let's do it.
He can't back down from a challenge.
Sure.
So he goes on this. Now, they had never planned for this expedition. So the whole time they have food shortages, and they're basically on a starvation diet the whole way. And the canoes that they had, these big dugout canoes, just weren't made for the rapids and stuff like that.
So this wasn't like the Jungle Boat cruise at Disney World. This is pretty rough traveling.
Yeah. So they leave, the expedition starts on December 9th. They get to the headwaters on February 27th. And then they're going to start down, right? Now, on this, they had a minimal crew, but one of the scary things is one of the local indigenous tribes was following them the entire route. They didn't do anything to them, but in 1920, they go and they slaughter a whole bunch of workers that were
I think
brought
that would
in.
probably be pretty weighing on my conscience to have natives following us down the river, making sure we're.
That's in the Jungle Cruise.
That's in the Jungle Cruise too.
Right.
That is, yeah.
Now, he at one point Two boats are going to crash into a rock, so he jumps in the water and tries to stop it, and he gets a wound in his leg.
Okay.
All right, and it becomes infected, and it then leads to him also then getting a tropical fever, very much like the malaria he had in Cuba. Right? And while they had a surgeon or a doctor with them, they didn't have any penicillin or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? In addition to that, during his run for the presidency in 1912, there was an assassination attempt on his life where he gets shot in the chest, and he stays and gives his hour-long speech with the bullet in there.
Once again, man's man.
Yep, and he never goes and has it removed.
Okay.
So that then exacerbates
Stays in there.
the wound as well, the fever and stuff like that. And through the rest of the length of the trip, he's going to lose roughly 50 pounds. He's going to begin to hallucinate. His fever is going to go well above 103.
Yeah.
At one point, he's just repeating the first two lines from Xanadu by Kubla Khan over and over and over again. Right? He's begging to be left there. Now,
Just let me die.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kermit went with him as well on this
His
one.
son. Yeah.
His son. And he doesn't leave them.
Yeah.
He brings them back. But he's never the man that he once was after that. And he even said to one of his peers that trip took 10 years off of his life. And when he gets back in 1914, he dies 5 years later.
So it did literally wear him out.
Yeah, and just those 4 adventures, think about how rough the choices he made.
Well,
were.
4 adventures, and beyond him just being president. So this is just him as a man in his life. So just being what he is.
And then you throw in he was a dad of 6 rambunctious kids.
Yeah.
He actually said about his oldest daughter that he could either be the president or manage Alice, but he couldn't do both at the same time. All right. So in total, they did 625 miles on the uncharted river.
Yeah.
And they end up naming the river after him. So it's no longer the River of Doubt. It becomes known as Rio Tedodoro. Right. And so you can go and see that. Now, on the journey, 3 men did die.
Okay.
Right?
Of his men.
Of his men. One drowned in one of the many rapids.
They had rapids and waterfalls.
Right?
Those are the big things. Yeah.
Then one of them killed another one. And they buried the guy
That
where
was
it
murdered.
happened.
Yep.
And then they left the guy who did the murdering to whatever happened
In
to
the
him
jungle. He just had to survive.
All right. So who knows what happened to him? They just said he died and left it at that.
Gotcha.
Now this journey is going to end April 26th of 1914.
Yeah.
And what they meet is the relief party that's at where the Rio Tedodoro flows into a much larger river.
Gotcha.
Right. So his adventures are pretty amazing when you think about it.
So,
because imagine George Bush, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Obama going on an expedition after they've been president with little to no security or whatever. And, with the animals in Africa, like one of the rhinos, he killed at 20 paces.
So,
right?
So it was a different breed of person at his age. So. Yeah.
So that's Teddy, and that's some of his adventures.
Fantastic.
I just love seeing those kind of things that he goes and does because it makes him such a unique person in our
And he
history.
had so many other things too with his presidency and that. These are just 4 little things. But I think the biggest thing we want you guys to take away too is to think about one of our favorite things is that Pigskin Library. What would be those books that you couldn't live without? What would these books that you would take with you that would be your library?
So please comment on those either on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever. All right. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. For those of you guys who are at the Buy Hut, if you guys can come on down, we do this every Monday night. We do our History and Drink podcast and followed by trivia afterwards. So we're going to get with the guys here, trivia, and thank you guys for coming out tonight.